Hey everyone, my name's Kelvin and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial for Procreate. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to paint in a completely different style than we usually do. But I promise this is a really easy project. It's a really easy technique and I think anybody can do it. So I'm going to start out here with a blank watercolor paper texture, and I'm going to do all this with the regular watercolor kit. Pretty much I'm just going to use the abstract round and the fine liner pen and the water blender. And I've already got my sketch in there. And I've just put the sketch on the top layer, and because the sketch has a white background, I just set it to multiply, otherwise it'll just cover up what I'm painting down here. And then I'll just select a layer underneath the paper texture, and you can use any color, but I'm really preferring a kind of desaturated blue color, something like that. And I'm going to go and grab the abstract round, and I'm just going to roughly fill out the silhouette of this cat. And I'm going over it first with a lot of pressure, so it makes a lighter brushstroke. But I'm going to go over it again, and I'm going to use lots of different pressures just so I get a lot of varying opacity, because I want the texture here to be extremely variegated. So after I've got the rough color laid down, I'm just going to grab the water blender, and I'm just going to break up some of these edges, but because I like the texture, I'm going to try to leave a few behind. Now next, I'm going to grab the eraser brush, and I'm going to set it to the fine liner pen, and at a really small size, I'm just going to cut out this cat. So following the sketch, I'm just going to carefully go around like this. So I've completely cut out the cat, and it's pretty straightforward. I just made sure that I was extra careful around the ears because it's really important that I don't erase too much of them and make them too small. Now I need to separate the cat silhouette from the extra watercolor stuff that we don't want, and I'm going to do that with the selection tool. So I'm going to grab the selection tool and I'm going to set it to automatic. And I'm just going to click on the cat body and drag. And when I do that, it's going to make a selection. You'll notice when I click and slide, the sort of level of selection changes. I want to slide it until pretty much the whole silhouette of the cat is totally filled in by this sort of beige color. And now I can just go down here and click copy and paste. And it just basically cut out that selection and pasted it on a different layer. And I can see that over in the layers panel. So before we just had one layer, but after I did that selection trick and copied and pasted, it made this layer over here. Now I don't need the original layer anymore, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And what we're left with is basically a watercolor silhouette of the cat. And this by itself looks pretty cool, but in this tutorial I want to show you how to give this a kind of fluffy effect. But before I do that, I want to separate the layers in the cat. So what we have here are basically there's two layers. You have the main body of the cat, and then the legs, the distant legs. So I'm going to isolate those just a little bit. Now the way I'm going to do that is with the selection tool again. So I'm going to grab the selection tool, but this time I'm going to set it to freehand. And I know from the sketch which legs are in the back. So that's a back leg and that's a back leg. And I'm just going to grab the selection tool and I'm just going to sort of select just along the boundary there. I'll go around and then select the other one. So we're still on the same layer, but I've just isolated those two back legs. And I'm going to go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just lighten those quite a bit. And by making them this way, by making them lighter, they stand off and it gives this a little bit more depth. Now at this point, I'm just going to go and turn off the sketch, and I'm going to change my brush to the water blender brush. And at a pretty medium size, maybe 20%, 25%, I'm just going to go in there, and you know where we have these hard boundaries? I'm going to try to soften those. Now I just barely softened it. You know, I still want there to be a boundary or some kind of boundary that says that this leg is further away than the front leg, but I don't want it to be really well defined. Now after that, I can move on to making this a little bit fluffier. So, you know, on a cat, there's usual areas where they're fluffy. Usually it's the tail, it's kind of the butt, it's usually the neck, and also the belly as well. So in those areas, I'm just going to use this blender brush at a pretty large size, and I'm just going to sort of fluff it out like this. Now the trick with this is not to get too carried away. If you're a perfectionist like me, you'll really get lost constantly working that edge and trying to make it perfect, but it really doesn't have to be perfect. Just do a couple passes of it and it will look awesome. Now after this, I want to add some lighter areas to the body of the cat. So I'm going to make a new layer and I'm going to select pure white. And I'm going to grab the abstract round again. And in just a few areas like this, I'm going to paint on some white. And next I'm going to grab the water blender again. And at a similar size as before, I'm just going to mix up these lighter areas. Now, you don't have to do that, but I like to add the white because it adds a little bit more depth to this wash. Now, as a finishing touch here, I'm going to do the eye. And I think in this case, since this is a really abstract illustration, less is really more. So for the eye, I'm just going to use pure white. And the eye is it's kind of a slightly upturned eye, so I'll just outline it like this. And then after that, I'm going to grab the water blender, and at a smaller size this time, I'm really going to blur out that eye, and then I'm going to try to sort of rebuild it. Just push that boundary back in with the blender. Maybe I'll turn off the sketch so I can see it a little bit better. But I'm just going to push this white around until it just barely fits that sort of crescent or triangle shape there. And then I can zoom out. And that might be good by itself, but if it's too light or too dark, you can always just adjust the opacity of it. And I really prefer if it's really light. So I think something like that looks pretty good. And as a final step, I want to add some random color variation. So this has a slight blue tint. So I'm going to go and grab the layer that actually has the color. It's this one here. And I'm going to grab the selection tool set to freehand. And I'm just going to make a random selection like this. And I'll feather it out quite a bit. I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just shift the hue just to introduce a kind of secondary color into there. And there we go, this one is all done. So as you can see, it prints out really nicely, and it's a really simple project. The outline that I used in the beginning, that sort of silhouette of a cat, all I did was I just went on Google Images and just looked up walking cat and found an image and just made an outline of that in Procreate. And you could do that with anything: dogs, cats, birds, animals, people, anything. And it's a pretty flexible technique. Now, as for the texture, I didn't do anything really advanced in this tutorial, but if you want, I think this project is really suitable for the salted watercolor brush kit. And that pretty much wraps it up. Don't forget to like this video if you like tutorials like this, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But other than that, guys, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.